troubling.
Sorry,
Right.
I was going to start us off. Um,
Right.
what I was sorry as well to interrupt you, Tanwen. I was going
It's
to say maybe
okay.
we should start.
Yeah.
Um, I will let
Didn't
me
realise
begin.
the time.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are recording, so yes, that's just a warning. If you wanted to come on video or not, that we will be recording this. Again, also we're recording this obviously for people to watch post event. Um, so yeah, thank you for joining us this afternoon. We wanted to take a moment just really to make some noise and launch the work that we've been doing actually for quite a while around the Key Stage 3 materials. Um, and I guess what I will do is just take a step back actually as well and give a bit more of an introduction, just in case. I think everyone on the call has probably heard this, but just an introduction to who and what the Ministry of Eco-Education is. So we're a group of teachers, many of us still part-time teaching with lots of kind of varying expertise and specialisms, and that's something we'll touch on later on. But as a group of teachers came together 3 or 4 years ago with the premise of wanting to support teachers to be able to integrate sustainability into their teaching, and I guess share the experience that many of us had. So I think it will come through on the call. Lots of us independently developing climate and nature-based curriculum and incorporating it into our teaching, and going through quite prolonged journeys, I guess, trying to find this ourselves and feeling quite isolated, and instead wanting to help bring that to other people, and help other people be able to not have to go through such an arduous journey. So we were really fortunate to be supported by Dale Vince through the Green Britain Foundation, who funds the work that we do. And I guess it's through that network, through the organizations and companies that Ecotricity provides energy for, that has opened up a lot of opportunity and also opened us up to lots of resources, opportunities. I guess I've just said that, and support. So since well, I guess 3 years ago, we started this journey with Minchinhampton Academy over near Stroud, near Bristol, working really closely with the primary teachers there. And we developed this primary curriculum that took the seeds of kind of what they were doing around quite action orientated, really climate focused curriculum, and linked it with the wider teaching resources that were available from lots of different organizations. And that, I guess, is the real key of what we're trying to do with the Ministry of Eco-Education, is not kind of reinvent the wheel in the sense that we come up with completely new lessons and presentations and material, but instead add value to the stuff that already exists by linking it together and weaving it into learning journeys. And hopefully, again, that will come through in the call in terms of what we talk through. And it's by amplifying all of those resources and helping support teachers to be able to make best use of all of those that ultimately we can, I guess, achieve the what we're all trying to work towards, which is essentially a greater level of climate and nature-based education across the curriculum in every subject for every young person. So let me introduce you to the secondary materials. Sorry, I'm just going to find the right bit to link. Um, share with you this. So everyone has access to the Ministry of Eco-Education website. Every school in the country has a login set up, and it's their main school email address. It's the one on the website. There's a big database that the Department for Education have, and we've used that to yeah, set every school up for access to this. So what we've got here though is a summary table. So normally people would access the website through our main website, and I will introduce that in a second. But I wanted to jump into some of the real kind of the structure and bones of this, of the Key Stage 3 curriculum. So what we've done is taken our kind of stereotypical big questions that we've got now across all of early years, Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, and adapted them to fit the Key Stage 3 setting. And what that has allowed us to do is to go into a bit more depth. It's allowed us to bring a bit more of the subject knowledge and also to tailor it a bit more towards that really subject specific aspect as well. The primary materials, the key stage 1 and 2 materials could be a little bit briefer and a bit kind of lighter touch. But as soon as you start to get into the secondary curriculum, it's both an opportunity and a challenge that it becomes a bit more subject specific and a bit more siloed. And that again, as I sort of say, is a challenge, but also an opportunity. So the key thing with what we've also brought together here in adapting the primary approach to secondary is identified two subjects that can teach in parallel to a shared big question. So with the primary stuff, all of those subjects are mixed together. It's kind of cross-curricular in a real kind of broadest sense, and there are aspects of different subjects throughout those. That in itself wouldn't kind of lend itself to secondary. So instead, we had to think about this and thought, let's bring two subjects together, and that gives a really novel approach and allows some exciting dynamics in there as well. And what we've also tried to do with those subjects is be a bit kind of different in the sense of those two different subjects and not just taking the stereotypical ones that you might think of, and instead use them as an opportunity to bring other subjects into the mix. But in this table, what you've got is the seven organizing themes. And actually, there's so many of these questions. There are two slides. So I'll shift to the other slide in a second. But we've got seven key themes of what was it, energy, transport, food, nature, society, waste, and water. And then each of those also has kind of a key theme or a kind of concept within them. So we've got things like the idea of thinking of futures, about community, of jobs, of that human nature relationship. What those sorts of concepts do is give the series of lessons a sort of a direction and a spin, and it allows people to kind of better understand where that question's going. We've then got these big questions, and I think all of us have got a kind of favorite and quite like certain ones of these. They're phrased in a particular way. And actually, some academics, some teachers might look at this and think, oh, they're a bit brief and a bit flippant and a bit annoying. And actually, they're purposefully like that. We've sort of gone down this populist route of saying, let's come up with a really catchy question that isn't necessarily the best question to ask. It's not the sort of one, these aren't exam questions. It's not what you'd expect to see in an external examination. Instead, it's something that you think, oh, people in the media are talking about this, and young people may well be interested in kind of the direction of this, and society is questioning this, and why don't we engage young people in this discussion as well? And you can see that in maybe one like, should ecocide be law? Again, that's something that ecocide. There's a few ongoing court cases. Bringing rights to rivers is maybe the most obvious one. Uh, we've also got things like there's ones around AI as well. I jump through to the second one, you can see a few more of these. In terms of the last two columns, then, what that also then highlights is the two subjects that we've brought together. So with all the primary teaching learning journeys, there are about 8 lessons. And again, that's flexible. It's designed so that teachers can kind of pick and choose and lengthen it or shorten it if they wanted to. But with these Key Stage 3 ones, we actually have 16 lessons. So there are two subjects teaching in parallel with 8 series of lessons each. So we've kind of doubled the amount of support and material around these. And again, let's hope people interpret this as support, kind of inspiration and support as well. So, it may be that another subject sees these and thinks, oh, I can adapt this, or that's useful for my subject as well. So it's meant to be flexible in that sense. That last question is that real world kind of beyond the classroom, beyond the teacher, value of kind of exploring this, that outcome is extended and developed as well. So in primary, we've got some really exciting ones around creating a fashion show or creating teaching materials for kind of parents, or creating some sort of output like a song or a poem. But these go even deeper, and so there's things like an opportunity to link in public speaking competition or the Young Green Britain Challenge as well, another great initiative that we're connected with, or things like going for a walk or creating your own campaign around something, or a whole field trip as well. So there's even more kind of breadth and opportunity within these. Um, what I will do before I hand over to the rest of the team is I'm just going to stop sharing and show you what the website looks like as well, just to give people the experience of actually how you'd access this. So What we've got is this is the holding page, the kind of front page. And at the top here, we've got curriculum as a link. And you click that, and it brings up all of the seven key themes. And when you're logged in, so at the moment I'm logged in as Minchinhampton, you can click through and access the full questions. Now, we've kind of thought of the best way to present and to share this. And what we've decided is actually all these questions are useful for people at any subject, any age group. So we didn't want to make it too prescriptive that you kind of filtered it by an age group and it meant you missed out on lots of the other questions that could be useful for you. But what you can see on this one is there are some that are specifically for early years, just because the nature of how that is taught and the way that that's kind of structured is quite different. And that's the same then as well for, let's check in the society one, for Key Stage 3. And what you can see, if we dig into, let's go to this one, and I know this actually is going to come up later on. We've got one like how important is play, but you can see there in brackets, it's got Key Stage 3, and it just directs you to this has been specifically designed with the secondary audience in mind. And it's the same structure as how we've got with the primary materials. There's the concept, there's the key texts and kind of books and materials, the national curriculum links, the sustainable development links, and then also a summary of all the key ideas. So as a teacher, you know what it is that these series of lessons are trying to get at. And again, it's kind of twice as detailed. It's got both subject areas there. And then as you scroll down, you've got, I know I can see Sarah's particularly interested in this English one. Um, We've got the lessons listed by subject and numbered. So we've got English 1, English 2, English 3, and then afterwards you've then got History 1, History 2. So again, that's just kind of the way that we've ended up structuring this. And that's something for everyone. You can go and explore this afterwards. But what we want to get into is sharing some of our most favorite questions. And in order to do that, I'm going to introduce Tanwen. Now, Tanwen, you'll be able to do a much better kind of introduction to the breadth of subjects. But you came on board as someone we connected with over the last few years. We'd kind of done a few events, and then we realised actually that you had some really interesting subject specialism and experience to be able to bring to the learning journeys and the curriculum. And you've been an integral part to really helping to finish it and kind of build these last few questions. I'm going to hand it over to you there to give a much better introduction. And then when the moment comes, I'll bring up the slides as well.
Perfect. Hi everyone. Lovely to see you all here. So yeah, as Paul mentioned, my experience has kind of varied quite rapidly. I've quite hugely, sorry. I've gone from kind of early years when I was at university level, and then trained as a secondary school teacher, having had some experience in primary as well as a learning support assistant. And then for the last few years, I've been running some teacher CPD sessions. At UCL. So yeah, having a real breadth of knowledge across kind of education as a whole, which has been absolutely amazing. And then in terms of the subjects I've taught, my degree was in sociology, but I ended up training as a social science teacher, which covered actually sociology, psychology, a bit of law, a bit of citizenship. And then when I started my first job, I ended up doing a bit of RE. And then largely settled on history and sociology, which I absolutely loved. So I feel like I've got loads and loads of knowledge across a wide spectrum of things. And while I was at the last school I was teaching at, I became the eco lead, which I campaigned to be a kind of paid position, not with much time, an hour across 2 weeks, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, being eco leads. Um, but it was by far the best part of my job, and I'm sure that you can all agree it's an amazing way of meeting young people and seeing them in a very different light to how you see them in the classroom. Um, and since then, I have kind of left full-time teaching, but still very much involved in schools, going to primary schools and running workshops, some secondary schools, and running kind of more green careers things. And then, yeah, over the last few years, I've been in contact with the Ministry of Eco Education and the brilliant work of the Young Green Britain Challenge as well. So, yeah, I come with a variation of things to share with you all today. I thought I would choose some of my kind of favorite questions that I went through in the end. So starting off with how important is play. I really like this one because I wanted to kind of focus on the idea that um, again, we can be playful in the way that we learn, and I think sometimes we lose students because everything is so formal and so kind of exam focused. And actually, I think this one can be a little bit silly in some ways, while still absolutely ensuring that they learn really valuable things about the world that we live in. Paul, I'm going to have to get you to do lots of clicks, I'm afraid. Thank you. So, firstly, you can see that this assessment type was for both of these subjects, so for English and history as persuasive writing. And I think seeing that these skills cross over multiple subjects, um, I think is really valuable. I think students often also get lost when they're kind of in a subject and they've got their blinkers on and they're only focusing on that, whereas actually persuasive writing is a skill that students obviously need across all these subjects. So we can be as kind of open as to how to write an essay, which obviously is an amazing skill for students to have. But Paul, if you click through a couple more, please, you could go through kind of into a really specific English perspective here of like writing to persuade, or either you could go into the more specific type of looking at the history skills and the kind of experience. Kind of skills of significance, the skills of importance, which all kind of like lead to exam based skills, but actually they don't have to be as obvious as that. And I think that's a real way in which kind of education can be dulled down and boring, but it just kind of it's a way of still planting those seeds if you feel that that's relevant for your students, perhaps if they're in the kind of later stages of Key Stage 3, that might be worth it. Then, in terms of the national curriculum links, it's about thinking about, again, all of those wider skills that they are expected to cover and kind of build upon across the 3 years. So, in English, thinking about writing, thinking about planning, thinking about drafting and proofreading, again, all brilliant skills that will support them in their lifelong journey of kind of learning and communicating. And then in history, it's about this kind of like breadth of understanding of society and culture. So understanding, looking at kind of the social and cultural and technological changes in Britain post 1945. And then lastly, we always want to connect things into the sustainability development goals. And so this one, there's kind of links into three of these different areas. So we've got health and well-being, number 10, reduced inequalities, and number 11, sustainable cities and communities. So throughout both paths here, whether it's the English path or the history path of learning this, students will get the opportunity to really delve deep into what these mean and how they're important in terms of their learning. So just to look a little bit at the history one in a bit more detail. So it's kind of starting off by looking at it from kind of what play is and has it always existed in this way. So looking at theorists, so this gives them the chance to kind of think about um, what play looks like, especially in terms of health and well-being, and being aware that kind of children's rights are a really important part of making sure that children are heard and seen within the society that we live in. But there's also links to things that are kind of historical sources. So again, really linking into the skills that they are expected to need in Key Stage 3. Then again, it begins to kind of think about the Sustainable Development Goal of number 10, thinking about reduced inequalities. So really understanding about perhaps gender differences and how play has played an important part in kind of separating the kind of experience of boys and girls throughout history. And then also with question number 3, you'll see how did play differ between social classes? So understanding again how class is a really important factor in understanding people's opportunities and experiences within life. And hopefully, with all of these sessions, we hope that it's a real chance for teachers to come up with some much wider questioning for these students and to really again question the world that they live in and to engage in society, perhaps in a way that questions previously in the national curriculum haven't really allowed for. Just the last one to look at for this one was then what was play like around the world. So again, offering this real kind of globalized perspective on the world that we live in, comparing and contrasting skills that again will be useful across multiple different subjects. The second one I'm going to talk you through is one of the questions, should ecocide be law? I'm not going to talk through the geography one here, but I'm going to just talk a little bit about the English one, and I'm going to jump between a few of what were my favourite questions. So of course, given that this is looking at it from an English perspective, it's about really understanding what ecocide is, understanding that definitions can vary. It can be a dictionary definition, it could be a legal definition. Why do these definitions differ sometimes? But also building on research skills. So within the curriculum that we've produced for you, there's again just loads and loads of links that you can choose what's appropriate for your students. Obviously, they can also do their own research with this, but it's kind of like a nice starting block for you to be inspired by, and hopefully for them to be inspired by. Then moving on to the second session in this scheme of learning. It's kind of this idea of, would it be different if nature had a voice? And really beginning to think about that narrative voice and thinking that nature has its own distinctive voice. And again, if this is really just about changing the perspective for young people, that perhaps before they thought of nature as totally separate from themselves, but actually if they were to give nature teach treat nature as though it was a person, and using those kind of English skills of personification, perhaps we might treat it differently. And then there's also other examples. The Nature is Boss picture is from Faith in Nature, the brand who make shampoos and things, but they have literally put nature as on their board, and so nature is their boss. And so it's again that there's someone acting on behalf of nature. And I think again, just really understanding these different perspectives, and offering new things that maybe students wouldn't come across in their everyday life. The fourth session, jumping just one more ahead, is then looking at kind of whether words matter when understanding the human-nature relationship. So for the Ministry of Eco-Education, the human-nature relationship is a really core kind of concept that we go back to over and over again throughout all of these big questions. And within this, I think there's a really lovely opportunity to use loads and loads of poetry that talks about the relationships between humans and nature. There's a few kind of examples of where some of those links are on the screen, but also just some really lovely specific poems. So this one here is by a spoken word artist called Woodsy, and it's an opportunity for students to dissect and understand really how humans are viewing our current relationship with nature, and perhaps how it could change in the future. And then lastly, leading to the kind of assessment for these questions, this one is a debate. So there's loads of links to kind of different ways in running parliamentary debates, but also like bite size and things like that, or templates on how to prepare for a debate from TES. So there's just like a multitude of different ways in which you could help students prepare for this assessment. And then there's this also from this do and don't screen, is a screenshot from a toolkit from an organisation called Stop Ecocide International. So again, it's just about really bringing together what already exists out there, and hopefully reducing your workload and reducing kind of the mental load for you as well, when you're trying to kind of think outside the box and teach something in a slightly different way. So yeah, I think that's me.
You stay there, Tanwen. Would I think it'd be interesting just to have a couple of minutes discussion. I think there's some really interesting themes that come through in what you've just presented there. Both that sense that we're not just saying we need to be teaching the knowledge of the climate nature crisis. We're also saying this is an opportunity to explore the skills and think also about the pedagogy of how and what we teach in a different way as well. And that those are really fundamental things that we need to bring together and sort of mix. And you referenced that when you said, look, there are these resources around this particular skill, and they're nothing to do with sustainability, but we're saying, well, that skill is going to be an important one to be able to explore this topic, and that's how we've weaved it together. So we've made those bits explicit as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I think with what you've just said, I a few years ago discovered the Inner Sustainability Goals, which are a kind of sister group of the UN's Sustainability Development Goals. And it all talks about the skills that young people are going to need in order for us to be able to achieve the UN's goals. And I think that's been a really key part of how I now see teaching, and how I see engaging with young people, that the skills that we that are currently lacking within the curriculum because the curriculum is so rigid. That hopefully these big questions really allow that opportunity to kind of um, learn in different ways and communicate in different ways than we have previously. And I think also just really highlighting that it's not all about the exams. I think the kind of exam factory that we've all been a part of and many of us still are a part of, we need to see those young people as kind of individual people, and actually someone who can't write an essay will be able to have an amazing speech and communicate these ideas in a much different way. So it's about giving the power to students and yeah.
Yeah, I guess there's underlying motivations of why you as a teacher might engage with this, and to help push back on certain elements of that assessment driven. Also, and hopefully this is something that we might talk about later as well, is that sense of, well, Key Stage 3 really is a window of time of a transition where actually you should be able to push back on those things, and there should be space for these sorts of things, even if that's something that you come to later. Um, the other bit I just wanted to come back to you with as well was that sense of, this is support for teachers in a really broad sense. There are websites that list these sorts of things. All of the things that we've found, anyone could find, but what we've done is tried to weave them together using our knowledge and experience, and build them into something that has, it's greater than the sum of its parts. And I wondered, kind of, if you wanted to talk to those bits about both kind of how challenging that can be to help find these things, but also then once it's together, what that's like.
Yeah, I think when I was eco lead and teaching full time from Key Stage 3 up to A level, everyone's very aware of the time constraints of teachers and how much you can give throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year. And so I think anything that can exist to make a shortcut for that, I think is brilliant, because what I really struggled with was I knew there were brilliant resources out there. I just didn't have the time to look through them and to audit them really. Whereas I think that's the thing that I think the Ministry of Eco Education do incredibly well, is that the work that we have pulled together for each and every one of us who've kind of put these questions together, is that we have had the time and we've had the privilege to really kind of understand whether the resources we're sharing are the right resources. And that doesn't mean that any kind of teacher has to use all of these, or they have to use them in the order that they are prescribed. It's totally up to the teacher to kind of say, okay, yeah, this bit works. But it's just meaning that instead of putting it into Google and trying to look through 20 links, you've maybe got 4 or 5 links that you know have already been looked at by one of us. Um, and hopefully that helps you.
Yes, definitely. Okay, well, thank you so much, Tanwen. I'm
Thank
gonna
you.
now well, there might be a chance to bring you back in a minute, but what I will do is let's get Meryl in, because I guess one thing that you were just sort of referencing there is, this is a big team effort. Um, that, actually there's many people not on this call, Olivia, Paula, who've been involved in all of these sorts of yeah, big questions and building this. And actually, all of the teachers that we've gone and visited, and I guess people that have influenced us as teachers as well, have kind of had some input to this. But Meryl, um, I was just thinking you don't really need an introduction, but I guess the thing that would be
Maybe
useful is,
most know of me at
well,
least.
I think people were interested in maybe hearing a bit more about your story of kind of your journey of how you came into teaching, and where your interests and specialisms lie, because I think that then helps inform the direction you take many of these big questions.
Indeedy. So I'm just going to do that. So I've got not such a lot. Okay, hold on. There we go. I think I'm sorted. So I'm Meryl, and I was a teacher from the age of 40. Before that, I had done a PhD in environmental science. I'd worked in IT, done lots and lots of things, enjoyed them all. But at 40, I effectively thought, I know what I'm going to be when I grow up, and I went into teaching. Just as Michael Gove took out everything about sustainability and climate from the curriculum, pretty much. And so I was a new teacher, finding my way, working hard, incredibly hard. I think out of all of my different careers, it's the one that definitely stretched me the most. Loved it. Loved the practical work of science. Loved working with the young people. Loved competitions. did loads and loads of different sort of projects with about sustainability with the young people in after school clubs and lunchtime clubs. So, you know, thoroughly enjoyed it. Was effectively the school sustainability lead, but with no time, running the eco committee, trying to get the school estate to be as good as possible, but no recognition really for my efforts. And I wouldn't say I burnt out, but I became quite ill. I had a year out because I had cancer, and gave me time to think. So that was 2016. And it gave me time to think and reflect on my teaching practice, which is something teachers don't have that ability to do very often because you're just so busy during the school terms. So I sat down and I read the Paris Agreement, and Article 12 said, you know, we should be teaching everybody about climate change and how serious it is. And I was like, we aren't even mentioning it hardly in terms of in the curriculum. And however hard you work, especially in science, you know, and I know it's similar in other subjects, but the science curriculum is utterly prescriptive. So I found the Sustainable Development Goals, which Tanwen mentioned, and I started linking everything to the Sustainable Development Goals that I could. But it wasn't enough. I carried on. I became a Teach SDG ambassador, linked to the UN. I became a UN accredited climate change teacher, and I started becoming very outspoken about it, writing articles and things. And that kind of ticked all my boxes, but it was just busy. I was very, very busy again. And so last year I decided I'd started doing some work with the Ministry of Eco Education, and I decided I had to choose between, you know, whether I pursue my out of school career supporting schools and teachers and children for climate and sustainability and nature education, or do I just simply stay in the classroom and get the pension and leave after another decade or so. And I decided to go after my heart, which is do the fun stuff. I love what I do. I love working for the Ministry of Eco Education. I work with the Young Green Britain Challenge as well, and I thoroughly enjoy helping teachers and students. I still get to work with young people. So for me, this is a dream come true in terms of I'm now, you know, delighted to be able to help, and support teachers trying to do what they can, and putting pressure still on government to say, actually, you know, the curriculum review, they've just done it. They've looked at all of the everything except for early years, Key Stage 1 up to Key Stage 3 and 4, to see, you know, is the curriculum fit for purpose? How can we improve it? And there's a huge outcry to say there needs to be more climate and sustainability in education in there. And then the review comes out and it's two mentions of climate and one of sustainability and 11 of AI. So we can't take pressure. You know, we need to keep making sure that DFE understand, you know, the situation we're in, and that teachers need support and time, because you can't just teach children about climate and nature education and say, actually, here are the warming stripes, we're getting hotter, here are the biodiversity stripes, we're losing all our biodiversity, without enabling them to take action. I was very, very keen on project-based learning in the classroom, but it's all about giving agency to young people to allow them to become agents of change. It's the only term that Nadeem Zahawi ever used. I thought, actually, I quite like that. And I think
Meryl,
one of the things,
you sorry, just to jump in, you science,
I'm
um,
science, yes.
but you've kind of an interesting situation that your previous school was a middle school, so you have,
Yes, so I got to do all Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3, and I didn't have to teach to the test. It was amazing. It was the best thing ever. Everybody should have middle schools.
and
Uh,
then sorry,
and
Meryl, the other bit as well is your PhD. What was that in?
so in landfill sites and clay liners, very, very technical, but I did do work with organisations such as the Natural History Museum, getting out and talking to young people. So there was always a bit of a link for me to want to be in education, and it just took me a while to get there, and having my own kids helped, because then I had to have the holidays. So
There's sorry,
yeah.
Meryl, there's also a story everyone should probably know about your hair. And that as part of your work with the Natural History Museum, what did you get?
Oh, I
Uh,
had tigers in the back of my hair. Oh, yeah, I'm not going to put a picture on up now, but
you had
yes,
shaved into the back of your head a
I
tiger.
tried. Yeah,
So
Died snow leopards, tigers, all sorts. My mother calls me a disruptor, and I don't think she's unkind about it. But I'm very proud to be a disruptor. I think we need a bit of disruption in this world because without it, I think it's just a bit sad that where we're going, and the kids see it in the news, which is why we do what we can. And the Ministry of Eco-Education is absolutely happy to help teachers trying to embed climate sustainability into their curriculum. So I'm going to just briefly talk to you about what a couple of the lessons, questions, big questions that I've done, and they both relate to the same big question. So it's, do we need to insulate our homes? Now, if you're a science teacher or at work in DT, so these are the two subjects that I've linked the question to, then you'll be used to a science investigation that takes a beaker, you wrap it in bubble wrap, you wrap it in cotton wool, you compare the temperature change. But where does that make sense to young people? It's just like, oh, insulation, it makes things stay warm or stay cold. But actually, insulation is a huge part of how we need to transition to become a more sustainable future. So I've linked it to the book, No Miracles Needed. It's all about energy, and it's all about thinking about how we become more sustainable, less dependent on using energy to heat or cool our homes. So the first session starts off with something that the kids might have seen in school, which is Insulate Britain. I mean, why on earth are protesters standing in or sitting in the street with Insulate Britain placards and flags? It's for kids. They must just look at that and think, why on earth? And it's because actually, especially in the UK, our buildings are not fit for purpose, and insulating them is going to be huge business. It should already be huge business in terms of retrofit and things. So young people they were just recently in the news again, even though this was from a couple of years ago, because they're still going through the courts process, being found guilty of obstructing traffic and things, because now obviously the laws are changing to make protest even more challenging. So Paul, next slide. So what children need to know in terms of the curriculum is how heat transfer, what heat energy is, and how heat is transferred through radiation, convection, conduction. So we talk about that in the first lesson. We talk about how insulation can be help insulate to keep a house warm or cool in terms of the science by using the Energy Savings Trust website. So children can have access to that. They can do a small practical, but quite often people in science will do these practicals over 3 or 4 lessons. But it's just give them one lesson to actually see that, yes, you can measure the temperature change using different insulation materials. Then we get into the interesting things. So we talk about RIBA, the Royal Institution for British Architects, have a load of great resources about retrofitting. And these are jobs that young people will need to do, lots of jobs to try and make sure our buildings are fit for the future. So we link to those. We link to some great TED Ed talks about healthy buildings, about mold. They're about airflow, about different types of building materials that can use hempcrete, for example, which embody organic carbon in them to make a breathable, slightly breathable, but water resistant building material that's lightweight and stores carbon rather than using lots and lots of cement, which maybe releases carbon. So it gets children thinking about what our buildings are made of. We then go into sort of like novel things, which is this lady is talking about a mushroom brick, and the kids get to design an experiment to test how well a mushroom brick, mycelium, it is a material that's being used in the real world, but it's thinking about that as, what's going to change in the future, if we run out of other building materials. Then the children get to do their own practical work, which is designing maybe a shoebox house, lots of different examples put in there, and thinking about how they would insulate it, what materials they would use, how that would help stop the heat flow. Last one. And finally, a science fair to show the other members of the school and the school community what they've learned about insulation and why it's so important. So that's the physics side. But then we've got the same question in DT. So it could be that these two, the DT teacher and the physics teacher, talk in tandem so that they can actually be working on the same question at the same time or they stand alone on their own. If you've only got a DT teacher that wants to do the sustainability things and the physics department isn't willing to change, then it's standalone as well. It's just they are absolutely compatible. So this one starts about a young boy there in the video. It's a news article, and it's talking about how he has got terrible asthma, and it's because his building is not a healthy building. He's got mold because there's cost of living crisis and we haven't got enough energy to heat them properly. But then that leads into the Royal Institute of British Architects, some different resources talking about assessing the material properties. You then talk about those are the retrofit. Again, it's about retrofit, but this is big business for the future. Then the children start thinking about airflow through buildings. But then it talks something totally different. Should we heat the home or should we heat the person? Because actually, in terms of cost of living crisis, heating the person is equally as important in many ways, because that can actually stop elderly people from really struggling in cold temperatures. So then they design a prototype, a personal design of a sustainable personal composite insulator. And there's an example of using crisp packets there. And actually, for Young Green Britain Challenge, some of the teams, one of the teams that I was working with, they had some crisp packets in their bag, and they literally tried to make a blanket out of them. Kat, who's on this call, would love that. But so, it's about using maybe waste materials to make composites to do that. Then they learn about prototyping and about how important that is and how to make a good prototype. And then they look at the product analysis. They might look about the thermal performance, comfort, usability, durability, quality, energy efficiency, safety, environmental impact, cost effectiveness. And then it leads on to a design workshop where they actually show what products they've made and talk about them again, to talk about this problem that we have in, the UK homes are some of the worst insulated homes in the world. And they get too hot in summer and too cold in winter. So these young people that come out of these lessons will have the knowledge that they need, that maybe would lead them into different careers. So it's all about learning not only the curriculum, the product design and everything's part of the DT curriculum, heat transfer is part of the science curriculum, but they're going to just have it so much more applied. And I think one of the things for me is when I did my degree, it was in geology years and years ago, my degree supervisor, my tutor said, yeah, he would recommend me for a PhD as long as it was applied, because as much as I love theoretical science, actually we've just got so much work to do that if it's applied, then they're getting those extra skills that they might need.
Well, thank you for sharing those two, Meryl. And I think some of the key things that come through on yours, one is actually each of us has taken these in different directions, partly from a subject kind of, but also a personality aspect as well. And what I really like about the ones that you've come up with, they don't avoid any of these really, what some people might perceive to be a bit too,
Critical,
yeah,
potentially.
subjects and topics where people go, "Now I'll avoid that. I'll go and do this other thing instead." And you're like, "No, let's jump straight in. Let's explore this."
Yeah, and how well to capture young people's imagination, seeing that there's these elderly people sitting on the street. One of them was a vicar, and
And
I think that's
I think that's something you've done through your teaching career as well, isn't it? You've done so well at pulling those kind of examples of
oh
projects that then
yes,
brings it to life.
and that I think for to make sure if you think about what the day of a school child is, if they are just going through having teachers who don't talk about the real world, who don't inspire them to think that they can be a difference, who don't talk about careers, I think by doing that you engage those young people. And so no, I love doing one of the things I did always love about being a teacher was creating content and finding that content, but busy teachers don't have time to do it. So how joyful that I get to do that to help.
Yeah, and I guess you're a great magpie in that you don't care kind of well you do care who's made it. That's come up recently, hasn't it? We don't want it fossil fuel sponsored or funded, but in terms of the organization, I think some teachers maybe get to know one and are really happy to use the resources of one organization. But I think you're someone who throughout the teaching career has gone, no, this bit's great from that. I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that with another bit. And that's something that's a real strength of what we've managed to do. And it came through in your slides there. You were sort of showing all the different organization
Oh, yeah,
logos.
I mean, TED has got some amazing things, but kids don't want to watch them all of the time because they get, a bit formulaic. So it's about picking and choosing. And even things like BBC Bite Size, they have some really good resources on, but you wouldn't want to use them all. So no, it's yeah, definitely. And I've made some amazing contacts from talking to people about their resources and things as well. Yeah, loads of competitions, definitely.
Well, that helps give so much kind of motivation as well, doesn't it? I guess that's also for young people, motivation for them to be involved in others. Okay, well, thank you so much, Meryl. Um, I am just going to take a very quick moment to signpost one of the. Let me see if it can come up. Yes, questions that I created. So I guess my background is I was a secondary geography teacher and kind of interested in the humanities. And so this actually it takes science with history and it's based on a book. And again, that's something that I've always tried to do through my teaching career is kind of read a book and been inspired by and then linked it in. This one's by a historian called Alice Bell, and it's called Our Biggest Experiment, A History of the Climate Crisis. And what it tries to do is put the context of the climate nature crisis actually in a historical perspective, which is often missing. People either teach about the climate crisis as if it's some really novel thing that they've only just discovered a week ago, or kind of young, that's the narrative presented to young people, that it's a sort of new challenge, and actually we've known about this for decades. And there are some really good podcasts from UCL and from the History Association, I think it's called, the Subject Organisation for History, which explores this. And what we've tried to do here is show how you can link two subjects of science, really bringing to life the kind of experiments and the history of this. Sorry, and the yeah, well, I guess the history of the science of it, and then the more contemporary history bits. But what I was going to do is this has been a real challenge to kind of bring these to life because planning documents are not the most exciting. What I want to just do is I'm going to jump in to um, have a quick look if I can get this up. Uh, yes, this is going to work. I'm going to share with you actually the planning document that sits behind the website. So for me, this is one way that I thought, it's a really useful way to be able to bring this to life. So in terms of some of the things I wanted to signpost, one of them was what we've tried to do is with each of these link, we call them further opportunities, and we don't call them homework because actually we think of them as more broader learning experiences to extend what happens in the classroom. And so this one looks maybe first of all at starting a conversation with a friend or family member about carbon dioxide, which again, would you really do that? But, if your teacher said, oh, why don't you go and have a conversation with someone about something you've just learned in the classroom? Could be a good way to extend the learning beyond the classroom. This one here, so they're looking at what's happened to the oceans, and these are using Marine Conservation Society resources. But then the further opportunities, then saying, why don't you take a trip to your local river or coast? And it could be that you kind of prompt that as a weekend thing or an evening, or it might be that it's an organized trip. Um, there's loads of great resources from the RSC here and also from the BBC. And then when we start to go into the history ones, there's some really important moments, which I think actually are just novel and exciting things that anyone should know. So one of them is that the Shell company, the Shell fossil fuel company, actually started out selling shells, and that was the resource that they were distributing and selling, and that comes into the name. And I think that's something that is just it sounds a bit like a pub quiz sort of knowledge thing, but I think is a really interesting aspect of this. And then the other part is also the role of someone like Thatcher and historical political characters. And so there's a very important speech that she gave, and there's a clip from that, and then exploring how kind of was her government exploring climate change? What did that mean? And then also looking at current government kind of ambitions. So yeah, I think that's an interesting one based off the book of Alice Bell. Now, what we wanted to finish with was to bring Sarah into the conversation. Now, Sarah Jukes is an English teacher based over in Malvern, and Sarah has been doing lots of innovation in curriculum in kind of your wider school. And we've had lots of conversations with you in the past. But what we were really keen to do was to think, okay, we've created these learning journeys and we want them to be inspiration. And what we want to do is think, okay, well, actually, what opportunities are there in the Key Stage 3 and what kinds of things can teachers do, maybe based on your own experience? Yeah, I guess let's start and then we'll see where we can go with the conversation.
Yeah, I love these questions. I think these questions are brilliant. And what I love about them is that they're kind of a really brilliant, proper starting point. And something I always think, I don't know if there's many English teachers on the call today, but something I think about English language in particular, particularly at Key Stage 3, when lots of other subjects don't have much time in the kind of teaching week. English has a lot, like English and maths with the kind of skewed hierarchy that we have. English has so many hours, and actually, because as you've shown with these brilliant kind of questions and schemes of work that you're developing, English is all about communication, effective communication. So, like looking through the list there, I love that English is paired up with so many of the questions, but it could be all of them. Like English could kind of get involved with all of those key questions and all of those units of work, because essentially English teachers can teach those nuts and bolts, the skills of persuasion in a bit more nitty-gritty detail and kind of think and teach that idea of effective communication using all of those questions. So I'm quite excited to share this. I'm quite excited to share this with members of members of my school.
I think maybe the other interesting piece as well is I know we've got maybe a couple of geography teachers on the call, but it's often geography seen as the linchpin, and it's geography that helps sort of push and extend this into other subject areas. But I think your case is interesting that you're actually coming at it from the English perspective, which I think then puts a bit of a spanner in the works, because then other people sort of realized, oh, actually, I can do this. It's not just science and geography.
Yeah. So what we do at the Chase, I'm very much using the flexibility of the Key Stage 3 curriculum, and the Key Stage 4 curriculum, and Key Stage 5 as much as I possibly can. I teach up to sixth form. And I think until we do get that much needed explicit mention within the curriculum that organisations are pushing for, then I think we can, not see the national curriculum as a barrier, but actually just utilize that flexibility. So as your questions are showing and as the content is showing, you switch the content so that you do address issues around the climate crisis and sustainability, and kind of finite resources and nature connectedness. So that and I think it's really it's a kind of quite simple mindset shift. And I think, like Meryl said, and like you've been talking about, teachers are so time poor and don't have the time to find all of the resources and even think to themselves, actually, we don't have to teach things just as we've always taught them. We can teach those skills and we can teach everything that we need to teach them, but just shifting the content. So at the Chase for English, for example, we think really carefully about the book that we're going to teach the class reader. We think about the persuasive speech we're going to use as an example. We think about, in Key Stage 3 and 4, we give lots of questions, very open-ended questions for an oracy task, debate task, discussion task that leads to a persuasive piece of writing or a well-considered essay. And so these questions, as you've shown, can completely replace the ones that we've been using, perhaps.
Is that then, sorry, Sarah, is that then also your sort of, I think with a lot of what you've shown me in the past, you really prioritize a certain skill and you say, look, as kind of English student, you need to be particularly adept at doing this, but the context that we are doing that around is less important, and so therefore that's an opportunity. Is that something you recognize as well, that sense of?
Yeah, and as I think as your set of questions and the work around them goes, it makes it so relevant and it makes it so topical that it's instantly much more engaging for the students. And it is because there's been lots of really brilliant quotations from lots of people in the community, like, you know, Margaret Atwood talking about how it shouldn't be called even climate change, it should be called everything change, because everything is going to change, or everything is changing, and it's going to change everything. And so everything becomes relevant, and so the kind of crossovers become really relevant too. So I love that there's kind of paired subjects there. So for example, we're at the Chase, whilst we're teaching a novel called The Survival Game in Year 8 English, which follows a climate migrant in the not too distant future, we're at the same time teaching migration in art as an art project, looking at birds migrating, but using that as a kind of deeper research, symbolic kind of metaphorical idea of human migration and why people might migrate. And the fact that it's happening at the same time makes it much more powerful for the students. We do the same in Year 7. Right at the moment, we have a kind of link with music. So music teach protest songs. Music only have 1 hour a week with the students, whereas English have 3 or 4. And so we're joining together, we've planned a unit of work together so that we're looking at skills that we would teach in English for poetry and for persuasive writing again. There's a crossover with music teaching protest songs. They would teach lyric writing, including rhetorical questions and repetition. And so it's just a perfect segue. And like Meryl said, and like Tanwen said earlier, you know, these are standalone projects that can work on their own, but joining together makes it much more powerful. And it could be quite small things. So thinking about the starter that you're going to do, a question that you're going to do at the start, or thinking about something at the end. And I think one of the most important things is that the more I look at what's going on in the school I'm teaching in, the more I realise there are so many things happening pretty much always at the same time that other teachers aren't aware of, that they could utilise so much more. So kind of mapping what's happening at any one time in the school, I think, is really important. And also persuading the gatekeepers, you know, persuading those heads of department and getting somebody from SLT on board, so that when you present these really good resources that are ready-made and brilliant, like these questions, it's not just one passionate individual person saying, yeah, I really want to do this. You know, it would be so much more effective if it can widen out and become a whole school initiative.
So I was just going to share, we've got again, it's kind of from other organizations that we've adapted and pulled together. We've got support to be able to map sustainability across people's existing curriculum, which I'll just share into the chat. But the other bit I just wanted to ask you about, Sarah, is what the practicalities of some of this cross-curricular element of you engaging with other subject areas. Does that happen just ad hoc in the staff room, or has your school got a structure in place where that's encouraged? Or
it's a bit of both, and it's becoming more and more structured as the years go on. I've been at the school for nearly 18 years. I was kind of a self-appointed sustainability lead about 7 years ago, and I think, like Tanwen said, I kind of really pushed for time on the timetable and for it to be a named role. And it helps that our head teacher is a geography teacher, so he recognises the importance of it. And we've got a very passionate and very, very active eco committee who do so much, and are so persuasive themselves. And so it's grown. It started off with just me doing it with a few other teachers, but on a really ad hoc basis. And now it's grown so that we get some CPD time. It is a challenge when we've had, for example, a recent change in our SLT makeup. So we've got a new member of SLT who is less interested in the whole concept of the client. Like, she sees it as a little pocket belonging to the eco group, whereas it was becoming a little bit more whole school. But on the other side of it, we have got a sustainability steering group of staff, which is new this year. I've just been given a time at a governor's meeting, and so I've got a linked governor now, eco governor. He's only temporary, he's going to do it for a year, but they're going to make that into a named position. And the most important thing is we've been given time in the CPD calendar, so an actual hour for departments to explore some of these brilliant resources. And then we're picking up on that tomorrow, actually, tomorrow after school. Because I think time is the most important thing, as is a recurring theme that we've just talked about. And I think the work that you're doing here makes it easier for sustainability leads. Last Tuesday, when I was given the CPD slot, I gave them links to the Ministry of Eco, lots of your videos, links to UCL, lots of their Sustainable Futures free CPD material, and Teach the Teacher. And I kept it to those three things because I thought I don't want to overwhelm anybody. And I know that there is something for everybody there, and they're good quality source materials. And also lots of departments are at different stages. So some departments, like in art, for example, they do the migration topic in year 8. They do a whole In the Wild project in year 7. They do Man versus Nature, a kind of sustainability project in year 9. So they're way ahead, in thinking about how to integrate climate and sustainability, whereas other subjects are just starting out and they're just kind of realizing, actually, we do this here, we could do more here. So I think one of the most important things is to try and get people in the heads of faculties, your head teacher, the kind of the people in charge, people who can make those decisions and kind of enable that planning to happen, so that it's not just passionate individuals, it becomes whole school.
I think we've also got evidence from the schools that we've been working with over the last 3 years that just by putting time and energy into this, you improve outcomes across all. It's not just about the sustainability, the climate nature piece. It's also just by teachers, either teacher motivation themselves. So you sort of reinvigorate teachers, you refresh classroom practice, and also then the outcomes of the students in that is broader measures also are really.
Fits in also with lots of whole school initiatives. Like all of these are essentially debate questions, and therefore fit with the kind of drive for improving oracy across schools. So like it's there's so many exponential benefits, I think, more exponential benefits than drawbacks, particularly. I mean, the main drawbacks we're talking about, actually you're helping teachers overcome, because you're giving them the starting point.
There's one you talked earlier about science and English collaborating, and I think that's a useful story just to share before we finish.
It was making me think as well about my husband's just started doing a PGCE in art, and one of his projects, well, his big chunky project is where is climate education in art. And actually one of the recurring themes there was working with, like, collaborating with science. So what we realized after Tuesday's meeting, where I was getting teachers and departments to think about what they already do in terms of climate and sustainability education, and next steps, like what could you do to improve and what other subjects could you link with. Me and the head of science got talking, and we were thinking, actually, we might use different terms for things across different subjects. In fact, we do. So, for example, I kept talking about climate crisis, and he said, we don't use the term climate crisis in science, Key Stage 3, we'd use climate change. So we thought, well, we could devise a really brief document that involves a glossary of definitions that are rooted in geography and science. So we worked with the head of geography, head of science, and me, and we put a shared definitions in place that we're going to escalate tomorrow or share out tomorrow. And I think the important thing there is that it's a starting point for all teachers, and I think it will do a couple of things. It will improve teacher confidence. So some teachers just don't feel confident addressing any of these issues. Whereas if they have a kind of just a really brief bank of words with definitions, that's going to increase their confidence. It also allows you to have the conversation with the students and know what the students know already. So in year 8 in English, I can say, I know you've been taught about climate change. Why might this writer use the more emotive term climate crisis or even climate breakdown? So you've got a starting point, and we're even thinking about creating, or we will create, a pathway so that teachers from across curriculum, not just in science and geography, they'll know what each student will know at each particular point in the year. So they can start the conversation with, I know you've learnt this in geography, I know you've learnt this in science. So it gives them confidence. It creates those links, making the learning much more kind of, robust. And also it just carries on the pester power so that teachers are thinking about it continually.
I think we haven't got time to explore that more, but I think a lot of people will say that has dipped off, that people's interest in this sphere and space has waned, and maybe that's a reflection of wider society or not. But what I would like to do is just bring in Meryl and Tanwen, and just I'm keen for people to have a chance to just sort of say a last something, and maybe a summary kind of in terms of your thoughts, and but equally, if there were any questions that anyone wanted to ask kind of between the four of us, or I have trying to keep a check of the chat, and I haven't necessarily seen there's been a few practical ones that have come through.
Robert asked a question, but both Tanwen and I replied. So hopefully, Robert, you're okay. So in terms of, from me, it's great to see some people on this call. I don't know if you want to talk about science, or a lot of the big questions are science and geography, but definitely by no means all of them. We've got citizenship, English, art, we've got DT, we've got loads and loads of different topics. So really it's a question of looking at your own curriculum and seeing how you could fit these in. But as I say, it's kind of like a slightly project-based learning, but don't feel like any of it's sort of like you have to follow every single step, because all teachers have got their own autonomy in their classroom, well, unless they work in a particular mat that tells them exactly what they need to teach and when, which is probably not a good place to be if you're concerned about climate and sustainability. So, but these are, free for people to use. We've got a great team of supporting people behind them, and it would be great to see some new people, getting on the site and using some of these fantastic new Key Stage 3 resources.
I think, Meryl, you also then touch on that, what we've not done is create something that's finished and just uploaded it. And actually, Meryl, someone who gets in touch with me all the time saying this is not quite finished or this bit's not uploaded.
I'm doing a new one called which is all about is the future community farms, and I'm going well down the look at chicken farms in reality, and young people should know where their food comes from, but that's political, but the chicken farming is destroying our chalk streams and all sorts of other things. And let alone the fact that they want to import American and chlorinated chicken or whatever.
But I guess then that's also a moment just to say that we're constantly adding new questions and building this. But also, that's something we've wanted to do over the last 3 years as well, is really help bring in other people's interests and specialisms. So we do that through other organisations, and we have had lots of other organisations input into the creation of these questions and to signpost their resources. But if you as a teacher, especially on this call, have got a really great topic, and I know Sarah's done some of this, where she's come up with some planning and said, look, I'll share it with you, and then we think about how then adapts into our framework, and then we can share that as well. So we're really keen for this to be a kind of ongoing collaborative process where we're constantly evolving, and even if that just means sending an email saying, oh, have you thought about this question, or have you seen this resource, or what about adding this in? So we're really keen to keep that going. Tanwen, is there anything you wanted to say?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose from what people have been saying this afternoon, is that sometimes we see climate and sustainability education only in these expected subjects. And actually, with kind of sociology being my main passion, one of the CPD sessions that I run is asking social science teachers where this fits in the curriculum, and they always start at the beginning of the session saying this doesn't fit in, and by the end of the session I've managed to kind of get them, I kind of split them all up into groups and get them looking at different parts of the spec at different kind of Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, Key Stage 5, and working out what case studies they can refer to. And just as Sarah's mentioned, like whether that's a starter where perhaps you're not quite, it doesn't need to specifically be something climate crisis related, but actually you can find that example and you can bring it into your lessons. I think it's really valuable to have that time talking about where this can fit into the everyday. It doesn't need to be that it's a whole question focusing on sustainability, because we know that there's not the time in the national curriculum for that. But actually, where you can pull it in, I think you have to be pulling it in. And so I would really recommend that to the eco leads. I know they've mentioned there's a few people in the chat who've said they're eco leads. If you can get kind of, even if it's an hour with your heads of departments, especially in this summer term when year 11s and year 13s have gone. And having that conversation about where does this fit into your Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, Key Stage 5 curriculums, I think that could be really valuable for you all.
There's
just on the back of, I just say as well, we've got a really good. She does a teacher at our school who's in charge of the tutor time program and PSHEC, and she's always giving me time to kind of share some of these ideas and create lessons around the climate crisis or sustainability, but we never call it that. And like lots of your questions, you know, you could give them to somebody without even mentioning climate education. So I think one of the problems is we don't have a term yet that everybody recognises, because it's not an established, you know, thing in the for Ofsted or for Department for Education. We don't have a shared name for what we're doing. Really, we call it climate in education or climate and sustainability education. You know, so I think actually people narrow it down themselves.
It should just be education.
Yeah, it's education. That's right. And also that what we were talking about earlier. I think Tanwen, you mentioned it earlier. You know, that idea of kind of teaching to the exam, but the irony. I always get struck by the irony. You know, when you are empowering students to be able to embrace one of these questions, discuss it in a really robust way, and when you make it very kind of project and inquiry based, they become so much more adept at any kind of Key Stage 4 or 5 question. You know, they are applying the skills. They are able to kind of look at a question really critically and address it so much better than if you just rigidly stick to kind of teaching to the exam, which is really boring for them. So it makes it much more relevant, and it empowers students and equips them much better for any kind of exam question, particularly in English. I mean, I can speak for English. That would definitely be the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. I was going to throw in there earlier that there's a teacher, Martin Steiner, who's famous for talking about green seasoning. And I think this is also it's a perspective, a kind of how you think about this. Not about kind of doing something around the climate nature education that stands alone. It's about weaving it throughout. And I think that's something, again, if we can get that across and help support people to do that, that's the better for everyone. I'm gonna say thank you so much to everyone who shared kind of their experience. Well, also thank you so much for all of the efforts that have gone into building this. You know, it's such a valuable resource now, and what we're keen to do is to share this and get as many people looking at it as possible. Everyone has got access to this through main school email. Now, if anyone needs a kind of reminder of kind of how they might log in, they can just email us. So if they go onto the website, there's contact details and an email. But this is something we want everyone to access. And also, the thing we're really keen to do is come and see schools who are kind of maybe inspired by or are doing things around the climate nature crisis. And we've got a team across the country. Meryl's up north. We've got Hannah in Leeds, myself down south, and Nirvana in London. And so if anyone's keen to kind of share, or happy, I guess, for us to come and see what you're doing, we'd love to kind of share that best practice and bring it to life. Meryl, is there anything else you wanted to say?
Not at all. I've really enjoyed speaking about Key Stage 3. I left the classroom last summer, and occasionally I'm just like, God, there's so many amazing things that you could do in the classroom. Sometimes it's a vague little tinkling of, should I go back? No, but no, I'm having too much fun this side. And Sarah, you might end up leaving too at some point. That's the trouble, isn't it? Those sustainability leads, you know, in terms of the people who get it, they do so much, and then quite often we're the ones that leave schools because, you know, there's much more work to be done. You know, so yeah, I'm having a great time, and I think if you enjoy your work, then it makes it just every day is a pleasure.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. I've really appreciated, Sarah. I think it's coming from you. There's bird sounds. Is this from in your garden?
The garden, yeah, it's great.
You're very fortunate there.
Amazing. I put mine on silent to check it wasn't mine because it sounded like it was just here.
We're back onto a park, so it's great.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Have a good rest of the afternoon and evening.
Brilliant. Thank you.